So going back to your answer from before, you talked about the self-reflexive nature of noir as a focal point of the book. And you also talk about how film noir grew out of the hard-boiled tradition in literature. Was the self-reflexivity there in the hard-boiled, or is that part of the transformation?
I think it's part of the transformation. That's a great question. Like, at what point does it become so self-conscious? I think that that hard-boiled literature had a very definite philosophical stance. I don't think that it was a highly self-referential literature for the most part. Now, it became more so because everybody wanted to imitate Chandler to some extent. I myself wanted to imitate Chandler. In fact, the book that you mentioned that I wrote, really, I ran out of Chandler to read, and I decided I'd have to write it. You know? I mean, if I wanted to read more Chandler, I was going to have to write more Chandler because there wasn't any more to read. So everybody kind of has wanted to imitate some of these great writers, especially Chandler and Hammett, I think, probably are the most imitated. So I think that it had a specific sort of stance that's identifiable, but it was not a highly self-reflexive style of writing. It was more when it became film noir that showed up, and I don't think I'd really put my finger on that to quite the same extent. That's a good point, and partly that's the talent of the people working in noir. I mean, you had such great directors in the early years of noir, and one of the roots of the podcast series was, in addition to wanting to do these things for noir, we also wanted to model seminar discussion for our students at St. Mary's in the Great Books sequence. And I think part of our understanding all along was that great books are often self-conscious books. And that part of the reason they're considered great books and part of the reason they continue to give us points to debate and think about is because they're already aware of what they're doing. And so that leaves them open to lots of interpretations because it seems they're already reading themselves. When you think of Poe, when you think of Henry James, when you think of so many of these authors, 19th century, but also a lot of the ancient Greeks, these people were very aware in their own style of what they were doing and of the argument they were making. And I think noir is the same thing. And I think a lot of its greatness and a lot of the reason that so many great young directors were drawn to it is this same impulse. They could do something that was so self-conscious.
I don't want to point out a discrepancy between what you're saying, but what I heard was that the hard-boiled novels that film noir was based on were not self-referential, but that great literature is often self-referential. Does that mean that the hard-boiled
is not great literature?
Right.
No, it means that it had different interests, I think, because there are different ways of being great. And I do think that, I think this is a good question because people will often dismissively refer to Chandler as a great stylist. And when I hear people say a great stylist, it strikes me as such a backhanded compliment. It's a way of saying he's not a novelist, and I don't think that's true. I think that things have different strengths. I think that film noir was a very self-referential style. I think that hard-boiled was a very spare and an unforgiving style, and that was a strength too. And that these two combined at mid-century America in ways that were so powerful because we needed a position that wasn't glossy, that wasn't sweeping things under the rug. Hard-boiled provided that piece. Then you have the extreme technical virtuosity of these European directors who are immigrating to America, which is drawn to kind of the most American of styles. And so when this literary style combines with this filmic talent, I think that's the self-referential greatness just kind of boils up. These people were, so often these directors were aware of no longer working in their own tradition. So I think that's part of the puzzle too. These, the literature and the film are great in different ways, but these directors are so displaced that they're aware that they're embracing a uniquely American form of writing, that they're working in Hollywood suddenly, but they're drawing on their roots. How could they not be self-conscious about it, in a sense?
So now we move on to literature post-film noir. There seems to be, when I talk to writers that consider themselves noir, or at least market themselves as noir, that the pool that they can communally drink from is the film noir and not necessarily the literature.
That's interesting. Couple of points there. That's a surprisingly complex comment. First of all, there's the question of sorting out hard-boiled noir when it comes to literature, which is notoriously difficult because noir has become a good marketing term. And when you're talking mid-century, I think it's easy to talk about hard-boiled literature and film noir. When you're talking about the renaissance of these hard-boiled stories, you start to run into all these things being marketed as noir. And that gets confusing because noir starts to encompass very different things currently than it did then. It starts to cover a lot of graphic novels that are very stylized, mid-century looking, but have an ultra-modern and much more violent ethos kind of underneath them than what was hard-boiled literature. So noir already is kind of tricky when you start talking about modern literature. But I think within that you're right, and it's partly because, well, maybe it goes back to the question of greatness and the fact that we're all drawn to these films because they're so self-referential that they continue to inspire us in different ways. We're somehow hip to the fact that they already knew what they were up to and they were already kind of giving us a lesson on how to construct a story. And you can't help but be drawn to that as somebody who constructs stories. But I also think that there were different, such distinct voices within hard-boiled that it's harder to find consensus on who the great hard-boiled writer was you should imitate than it is to find consensus on wanting to imitate great films noir in general. You know, somebody who's a disciple of Hammett is very different from somebody who's a disciple of Chandler or of Kane, even though these people are grouped together as the great, you know, hard-boiled writers. So I do think that that in and of itself, you know, writers are so attentive to style that the differences in style with that source material makes it harder to find consensus than to find consensus on the fact that these are great films.
So did noir literature exist prior to film noir? Or did it need that self-referential quality from the films in order to grow into something that referenced the films?
Another great question. I don't know that you can say because noir literature, to my mind, is as much of a marketing term as it is anything that really groups together writing that has similar characteristics. So it blurs distinctions right now. I mean, when people say they write noir, it means so many things. It can even mean international crime thriller. It means graphic novels. It means throwback, hard-boiled writing in the mid-century tradition. You know, authors like Megan Abbott and Krista Faust and Charles Ardai. It means people who are influenced much more by the graphic novel tradition. I've heard Duane Straczynski referred to as noir writer. Alan Guthrie. These people have little in common in some ways and a lot in common in other ways. So that's a hard thing to sort out. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer that.
Okay. That's all right.